Hey, welcome back, everybody. Today, let's go over some of the most common 401k mistakes that you might be making. First thing on my list is not contributing enough money to get your full employer company match. One of the things that people forget most often when they join a new company is to check to see how much money your employer is willing to contribute to your 401k anytime you also contribute money. There's a lot of different matching programs out there, and not all companies will actually offer a company match, but this is something to watch out for. And if your company offers a company match, I would generally recommend that you go ahead and take it. And what I mean by taking it is making sure that you are contributing enough money into your 401k so that your employer will match that money and give you the most benefit to your 401k possible. As a very quick example, let's say that you work for a company that will pay a 100% match to the first 6% of your gross salary contributed. This means that if you make $100,000 per year and you contribute $6,000 to your 401k in a given year, your company will also contribute $6,000 into your 401k on your behalf. This is actually a good segue into one of our other common mistakes, which is poor timing of a resignation. And this all depends on vesting schedules. So depending on the company you work for and depending on the 401k policy they have in place, they may have a vesting schedule. And this means that any money that you put into your 401k might not be completely yours until you are with the company for a certain amount of time. Some companies will have a 100% vesting schedule, or also known as a full vesting schedule, from day zero, which means that any money that your company contributes to your 401k as a company match means that you own that money the moment they put it in. Other companies, though, might have a vesting schedule that grants you ownership of the money that the company contributes on your behalf over time based on your tenure. These can vary widely, but as a simple example, let's say that you have a 5-year vesting schedule. This means that in your very first year of employment with a company, you will not be eligible to own any of the money that your company puts in if you decide to leave the company early or if you get terminated early. Let's say that you work for a company that has a 5-year vesting schedule. This would typically mean that on your 5th anniversary since your date of hire, you will then be eligible to own 100% of the money that the company has contributed to your 401k as a match at that time. Before that time, however, you're only going to be eligible for portions of it depending on how long you've been there. Typically, this means that after your 1st anniversary, you'll be eligible for 20%. After your 2nd, you'll be eligible for 40%, and so on and so forth up till your 5th anniversary, when you're eligible for 100% of the money that the company has put into your 401k. This does mean, going back to my point, that terminations and early resignations could be poorly timed depending on when they hit. Keeping that example of the same 5-year vesting program, let's say you've been working for your company for 4 years and 11 months, and you decide to leave the company and submit your resignation. Well, if you do that, you won't be eligible for 20% of the funds in your 401k that your company contributed on your behalf. So be careful with this, because it might be worth staying just a little bit longer to make sure you can walk away with all your money. The third common mistake that people make is also related to these company matches, because unfortunately they can get complex. So there's one detail that people overlook quite often, and it has to do with whether or not you are contributing to a Roth 401k instead of a traditional 401k. The issue happens when you are contributing to a Roth 401k and your company offers a match. A common misconception here is that the match that the company puts in is also going into your Roth 401k, and this is not the case. The IRS mandates that even though you are contributing to a Roth 401k, your company's matched funds are not allowed to be contributed to a Roth 401k. So any funds that your company contributes on your behalf as part of a match will not go into your Roth 401k. It will be actually put into a separate traditional 401k. This, of course, is very important for taxation purposes, because at retirement, when you decide to withdraw, if you are expecting that all of your money is inside of your Roth 401k and all those taxes are paid for, and you're not going to have to pay any, you're going to be in for a big surprise, because any company matched funds that you took on during your working years is going to be in a traditional account, and you will owe taxes on that money. Speaking of retirement, let's talk about the next mistake people make with 401ks. And this has to do with, believe it or not, contributing too much money to a 401k. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, there's actually two aspects. So first of all, the IRS has limits on how much you can contribute to a 401k each year. that you need to pay attention to. As I record this video, it's February of 2024, and the current limit is $23,000 per year that you're allowed to contribute to a 401k. So that's one way that you can contribute too much money to your 401k, but let's talk about a slightly different way, and this one might be a little bit controversial. I actually know several people who max out their 401k contributions every single year, and I don't necessarily think that's a good idea, and here's why. Think about this for a second. Let's say that you just turned 25 years old and you graduated college with some sort of petroleum engineering degree, and you're making absolute bank right out of college. And so you're contributing a whole lot to your 401k, thinking you're doing the right thing, maxing it out every year. Well, here's the deal. Realistically speaking, you can't really touch that money until the age of 59 and a half. I mean, you can, but you're going to be hit with severe penalties, and you will pay taxes even if you're contributing to a Roth 401k. So that money is effectively locked up. And let's say you've got it in your mind that you're going to max out your 401k every single year. And let's just assume that $23,000 remains the limit for the rest of time. You also decide to invest in the S&P 500, which has had a historical rate of return of about 11.88% since its inception. So you max out your 401k, you invest in the S&P 500, we adjust for inflation. Well, guess what? If you do this from the age of 25 to 59 and a half, you will easily have over $6 million in your 401k by the time you hit the point where you can actually touch the money. Is that awesome? I mean, sure, but realistically, in today's money, over $6 million, do you really need that for your retirement? That's a lot of money for retirement. If you listen to popular retirement advice, most financial advisors would typically tell you that you need to target pulling out 4% per year from your retirement account. This basically means that in today's money, you would be able to pull out the equivalent of $250,000 every single year for your expenses. And while I do think the idea of having $250,000 a year for your expenses is pretty awesome, it's just too much money. And it makes me wonder, what could we have done differently earlier in life to maybe enjoy life a little bit better rather than just hitting this arbitrary, I'm going to max my 401k mindset all along? The reality is that for most people, you're not going to need the equivalent of $250,000 for your expenses in today's money in retirement. So for me, the idea of maxing out your 401k every single year is not necessarily the right thing to do, in my opinion. If I have that kind of money to put towards a 401k, I would rather be a little bit more deliberate about how much I'm putting towards it so that I can enjoy life as it comes. This brings me to another mistake that people make with their 401ks, and that's simply just not paying attention to where your funds are allocated. These days, you don't see this too often anymore, but in the early days of 401ks, people would contribute to it, and then they would be required to go into that account and select which funds they wanted their money to be allocated towards so that their funds could be invested in the stock market and grow over time. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of people who didn't pay attention to that, never allocated their funds somewhere, and so they were just contributing money as if it was a savings account, and it was never actually growing because it wasn't actually invested in anything. These days, 401k programs are actually usually set up so that any money that you put into the account automatically gets invested somewhere. It ends up being more of an opt-out type of functionality. So if you start with a new company and you forget about your 401k for a while, chances are your money's probably being invested somewhere. But the fact of the matter is you didn't choose where you want your money invested. So pay attention to this. Log into your 401k, make sure that your funds are being invested where you want them to be invested. Speaking of making sure your funds are invested where you want them to be invested, that brings us to our next mistake, which is not periodically rebalancing your portfolio. This is something that a lot of people forget to do. They start a new job, they get a 401k, they start making money, they start having payroll deductions, do all the contributions and matches and all that good stuff, and the money's getting invested somewhere. And maybe they did go in and actually choose it that first time, but after 3 or 5 years at a company, you forgot to look at your account and the things that you chose were not doing so hot. Best practice here is to log onto your 401k account about once a year. Just check to make sure everything's going the way you want it to go and decide whether or not you want to rebalance based on the way the market is headed. For the record, I would not typically recommend doing this more than twice a year. Generally speaking, the market is a slow-moving animal, although it doesn't always seem like that. Typically with 401ks and general market index funds, you can leave them alone for a while and rebalance once a year. You'll typically be fine. Are you noticing a trend here of just pay attention to your 401k because it's important? This brings us to another mistake, which is monitoring your contributions and payroll deductions. Let's be honest, as much as we would all like to be able to trust our employers, our accountants, our HR teams, our payroll staff, they're just people, and people make mistakes and things happen. And I see this happen a lot where people just simply don't pay attention to their pay stubs. They don't pay attention to the pay that's entering their account. They don't notice when things change or when things go wrong. And at the end of the day, it might be months or sometimes even years before they notice mistakes. A couple of years ago, I was talking to a buddy of mine who had a major payroll mishap where they just weren't contributing to his 401k at all. And he didn't notice and they didn't notice. And he worked there for like 3 years and he missed out on all of those investment opportunities. So again, just pay attention, check your pay stub every so often, make sure things are going the way they're supposed to go, make sure your employer is matching your funds, and check your 401k to make sure everything's okay. Another big mistake people make with their 401ks is not paying attention to their beneficiaries and not updating their beneficiaries when they need to. So in case you don't know, one of the things you can do with your 401k and one of the things you should do with your 401k is to make sure that you're letting your provider know what they should do with your money in the event of your untimely demise. I don't know about you, but the idea of my family not being able to access the funds that are in my 401k really makes me super uncomfortable. So log on to your account, make sure that your spouse or your kids or your parents or a friend or somebody is designated as your beneficiary to receive your money in case you accidentally die somehow. This is really important to make sure things are easy for the people that are left behind. Another big mistake that people make with their 401ks happens when they leave their company, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Unfortunately, when some people separate from their companies, they either decide to withdraw the funds from their 401k and deposit it in their bank account, or in some cases, depending on how much money is in the account, the company will just write you a check for the amount in your 401k. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad decision or a bad thing, as long as you take that distributed money and put it in an IRA within 60 days of the distribution. The point here, though, is that if you do either intentionally or unintentionally take a distribution from your 401k upon separation from your company, and you don't put that money into an IRA within 60 days, you will be liable for penalties and taxes. So the open question here, of course, is what should you do if you separate your company? What happens to your 401k when you separate from your company? Well, it just so happens that I'm going to be making a video about that next. And when I post it, I will put a link to it right here. Hope you check it out. Hope this was helpful.